I sat rigidly in my chair, gripping the arms tightly as my husband Ethan's words echoed in my mind. Mom's diagnosis is the perfect opportunity to secure her assets. My heart pounded, and a sickening knot formed in my stomach. How could he be so callous about my sweet mother Eleanor's condition? Ethan leaned back, oblivious to my discomfort. With her Alzheimer's progressing, we can easily have her declared incompetent and gain control of her finances. He smirked at my mother-in-law Lydia, who nodded in agreement. Rage bubbled within me. I couldn't believe the two people I should have been able to trust were conspiring to take advantage of my vulnerable mother. Ethan continued, "We'll put her in a cheap nursing home and keep the majority of her money for ourselves." That was the final straw. I stood abruptly, startling them both. "How dare you?" I spat, glaring at Ethan. "Eleanor is not a means to fatten your wallets. She's my mother, and I won't let you exploit her condition like this." Ethan scoffed, his expression hardening. "Don't be so dramatic, Marla. We're just being practical about securing our future." "At the expense of my mother's well-being?" I shook my head in disbelief. "This is low, even for you." Lydia chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Darling, you're being hysterical. We're only doing what's best for the family." My fists clenched at her patronizing tone. Best for the family, or best for your greed? I looked between them, disgusted. "This conversation is over. I won't let you go through with this deplorable plan." As I stormed out, Ethan called after me, "You'll come around, Marla. This is happening whether you like it or not." His words echoed in my mind, fueling my determination. I would not stand idly by while they preyed on my mother's vulnerability. If they thought I would simply roll over and let them have their way, they had another thing coming. This was just the beginning. The battle lines were drawn, and I would do whatever it took to protect Eleanor from their selfish schemes. After storming out of that disastrous family gathering, I paced around my living room, fuming. Ethan and Lydia's callous disregard for my mother's well-being was sickening. I had to do something, but I couldn't take them on alone. That's when Kira came to mind. My best friend was not only loyal to a fault, but also a tech whiz. If anyone could help me gather evidence against those snakes, it was her. I dialed her number, my hands trembling with anger. "Kira, I need your help. It's an emergency." Within an hour, she was at my door, her brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on, Marla? You sounded distraught on the phone." I ushered her inside and recounted the entire horrific conversation I'd overheard between Ethan and Lydia. Kira's eyes widened with each sordid detail. "Those bastards!" she exclaimed, slamming her fist on the table. "Using your mom's condition to line their own pockets? That's a new low, even for Ethan." I nodded grimly. "Exactly, and you know how manipulative he can be. I need to get ahead of this before he has a chance to sink his claws into Mom's finances." Kira's expression hardened with determination. "You've got my full support. We'll dig up every shred of evidence we can find on their underhanded schemes." Without wasting a moment, she whipped out her laptop and got to work, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I watched in awe as she hacked into Ethan's bank accounts, uncovering a trail of suspicious transactions. "Look at this," she muttered, her brow furrowed. "He's been siphoning funds from your mom's accounts for months." My blood boiled at the confirmation of his deceit. Kira continued digging, pulling up legal documents that showed Ethan had already started the process of having Eleanor declared incompetent. "That snake," I spat, clenching my fists. "He's been planning this for a long time." Kira reached out and squeezed my hand. "We'll stop him, Marla. With this evidence, we can expose his true motives and put a stop to his plans." I took a deep breath, feeling a newfound sense of empowerment. With Kira's skills and my determination, we stood a fighting chance against Ethan and Lydia's greed. They had made a grave mistake underestimating me. I would not rest until I had protected my mother and secured her rightful assets, even if it meant taking down my own husband in the process. A few days after Kira's visit, I decided to pay my mother-in-law Lydia a visit. As much as the woman grated on my nerves, I knew I needed to play nice to gather more information on her and Ethan's twisted plans. I plastered on a smile as Lydia opened the door. "Marla, dear, what a surprise. Come in, come in." Her sickly sweet tone made my skin crawl, but I maintained my composure. "Hello, Lydia. I was hoping we could chat for a bit." She ushered me into the living room, eyeing me with suspicion. "Is everything all right? You seem tense." I forced a laugh. "Of course, just dealing with some family stress, that's all." I paused, gauging her reaction. "Speaking of which, I wanted to discuss Mom's situation." Lydia's expression darkened. "Ah, yes, your mother's unfortunate diagnosis. It's such a shame, really." "Indeed," I said tightly. "Ethan mentioned you two have been discussing options for her care?" She nodded, waving a dismissive hand. "Your husband is just being practical, dear. With her Alzheimer's progressing, we need to start making arrangements." My jaw clenched at her casual dismissal of my mother's well-being. And what arrangements might those be? Lydia leaned back, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Well, we've been looking into nursing homes that would be cost-effective. No point in wasting your mother's assets on frivolous luxuries, you understand." I bit back the retort on my tongue, forcing a neutral expression. "I see. And what about her finances? Surely you'll want to ensure her money is properly managed." Of course," Lydia said airily. "Ethan has already started the process of having her declared incompetent. That way, we can take over her accounts and allocate the funds as we see fit." My stomach turned at her blatant admission of their plans to exploit my mother. But I couldn't show my hand, not yet. "That's very considerate of you both," I lied through gritted teeth. "I'm glad Mom's affairs are in such capable hands." Lydia preened at the false praise. "We only want what's best for the family, Marla. You can trust us to handle this properly." If only she knew the depths of my mistrust. But I simply smiled and nodded, biding my time until I could gather the evidence I needed to take them down once and for all. After my disturbing conversation with Lydia, I knew I needed to take legal action quickly before Ethan and her schemes progressed any further. Thankfully, I had someone in my corner who could guide me through the process, Nolan, an old family friend and skilled lawyer. I made my way to his office, my mind racing with everything I'd uncovered about Ethan and Lydia's underhanded plots. As soon as I stepped inside, Nolan's warm smile put me at ease. "Marla, it's good to see you," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "Though I wish it were under better circumstances. You look troubled." I took a deep breath and launched into the sordid tale, how I'd overheard Ethan and Lydia conspiring to exploit my mother's Alzheimer's for financial gain, their plans to have her declared incompetent and seize control of her assets. Nolan's brow furrowed deeper with each revelation. "That's despicable," he muttered, shaking his head. "Using an elderly woman's vulnerability like that, it's unforgivable." Relief washed over me, knowing he understood the gravity of the situation. "Exactly, which is why I need your help to stop them, Nolan, before they can cause any more damage." He nodded resolutely. "Of course, Marla, you did the right thing coming to me. Now tell me, what evidence do you have so far?" I pulled out the documents Kira had uncovered, laying them out on his desk. Nolan's eyes widened as he flipped through the incriminating paperwork and bank statements. "This is good, very good," he murmured. "With this, we can build a solid case to have you named as your mother's legal guardian." A spark of hope ignited within me. "You think that's possible?" Nolan's gaze was steely with determination. "Absolutely. We'll draft the necessary paperwork immediately, along with an updated will, ensuring you have full control over her care and finances. That way, even if Ethan tries to have her declared incompetent, you'll have the legal authority to override his decisions." I let out a shaky breath, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, Nolan. I don't know what I'd do without your help." He gave me a reassuring smile. "That's what friends are for, Marla. Now let's get to work. We have a battle plan to construct." As Nolan and I pored over the documents, devising our legal strategy, I felt a renewed sense of empowerment. With the law on my side and the evidence to back it up, I would be ready when the time came to confront Ethan and Lydia's web of deceit head-on. They had underestimated my resolve, and they would soon learn the grave mistake they'd made. With Nolan's guidance, I set a trap for Ethan and Lydia. I invited them both to a supposedly routine business meeting, but in reality, it was the moment I'd been preparing for, the chance to confront them with the evidence of their schemes. As they strolled in, arrogant smirks plastered on their faces, Nolan stepped forward. "Ethan, Lydia, thank you for joining us today." Ethan scoffed. "What's all this about, Marla? You're wasting our time with these games." I remained calm, letting Nolan take the lead. "We're here to discuss the matter of Eleanor's care and assets, specifically your underhanded attempts to exploit her condition for personal gain." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're implying, but we've only had Eleanor's best interests at heart." "Is that so?" Nolan challenged, pulling out the stack of documents. "Then perhaps you'd care to explain these bank statements and legal filings where you've been siphoning funds from her accounts and initiating proceedings to have her declared incompetent." Ethan paled, his bravado crumbling. "Where did you get those?" "From a very reliable source," I interjected, my voice steely. "One that also recorded you both openly discussing your plans to strip Mom of her dignity and finances." With a few taps on his laptop, Nolan played back the damning audio recordings, letting their own words condemn them. Ethan and Lydia's faces drained of color as the evidence mounted against them. "You can't do this." Lydia sputtered, panic setting in. "We had every right to make arrangements for Eleanor's care." Nolan fixed her with a hard stare. "Not through fraud and exploitation. Marla has been legally appointed as Eleanor's guardian and executor per the updated will and documentation we've prepared." He slid the papers across the table, the weight of their contents sinking in. "Any attempts to undermine or contest these will result in immediate legal action. Are we clear?" Ethan opened his mouth, no doubt to spew more lies, but I cut him off. "Save it, Ethan. The jig is up. You've lost control, and you have no one to blame but yourselves." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air, the weight of their defeat palpable. Then, a sickening chuckle escaped Lydia's lips. "You think you've won, don't you, dear?" she sneered. "But this is far from over. We'll find a way around your little legal maneuvers, and when we do, you'll regret ever crossing us." I met her venomous glare with steely determination. "Bring it on. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Lydia. Neither of you has any power over me or Mom's future." As they stormed out, seething with impotent rage, I felt a surge of triumph. The battle had been hard fought, but in the end, justice and family had prevailed over greed and manipulation. And if they dared to retaliate, I would be ready. This time, they had underestimated the wrong person. In the days following our confrontation, Ethan became increasingly desperate. I could see the panic in his eyes as the reality of his lost control set in. He tried every trick in the book to manipulate me emotionally, from pleading innocence to blaming Lydia for leading him astray. "Marla, please, you have to understand," he begged one evening, his voice dripping with false remorse. "I never meant for things to go this far. Your mother's well-being was always my top priority." I scoffed at his blatant lies. "Save it, Ethan. I have the evidence, remember? The recordings, the documents, all proof of your true intentions." He ran a hand through his hair, desperation etched into his features. "Lydia misled me, twisted my words. You know how persuasive she can be. This is all just a big misunderstanding." I fixed him with a steely glare. "The only misunderstanding is how I ever trusted you in the first place. You were more than willing to exploit Mom's vulnerability for your own gain. Don't try to wriggle out of this now that you've been caught red-handed." Ethan's facade crumbled, and his eyes hardened with resentment. "Fine. If you insist on being this unreasonable, then I'll have to take matters into my own hands." Before I could react, he lunged for the briefcase containing Mom's legal documents, the guardianship papers, the updated will, everything Nolan had so meticulously prepared. I tried to wrestle it away from him, but he shoved me back with surprising force. "You can't stop me, Marla," he snarled. "I'll find a way to regain control, even if I have to burn this whole place to the ground." With the briefcase clutched tightly in his grasp, he stormed out, leaving me shaken and furious. I immediately called Nolan, recounting the incident and Ethan's unhinged behavior. "Don't worry, Marla," Nolan assured me. "Those documents were just copies. The originals are safely secured in my office. And thanks to the security cameras Kira installed, we have footage of Ethan's attempted theft." Relief washed over me, quickly replaced by a grim determination. "Good. We'll press charges and make sure he faces the full consequences of his actions." Nolan's voice was grave. "Agreed. It's time to put an end to this once and for all. Ethan has shown his true colors, and we can't allow him to continue threatening you or your mother's well-being." As I ended the call, I felt a sense of resolution settle over me. Ethan's desperation had only solidified the evidence against him. His deception had been laid bare, and now he would face the consequences of his greed and betrayal. There was no turning back. The battle lines had been drawn, and I would fight to the bitter end to protect my family from his toxic influence. With the evidence mounting against Ethan and Lydia, Nolan wasted no time in taking legal action. As soon as the charges were filed, the full weight of their misdeeds came crashing down. Lydia was the first to crack under the pressure. She showed up at my doorstep one afternoon, her usually pristine appearance disheveled, and her eyes wild with desperation. "Marla, please, you have to help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. This has all gone too far. I crossed my arms, unmoved by her sudden change of heart. A little late for regrets, don't you think? You made your bed when you decided to conspire against my mother. Lydia's face contorted with anger. That ungrateful little worm deserves everything coming to her. After all we've done, all the sacrifices we made to take care of her. I recoiled at her audacity. Sacrifices? You mean the sacrifices you were planning to make with her money and dignity? She flinched, realizing her mistake. That's not what I meant. Marla, please, you have to understand. Ethan led me down this path. He twisted my mind, made me believe we were doing the right thing. I shook my head in disbelief. Don't try to play the victim here, Lydia. You were more than willing to exploit Mom's condition for your own benefit. The recordings prove it. Panic flickered across her face. Recordings? What recordings? I arched an eyebrow. You didn't think we'd have evidence? Nolan has everything. The audio files, the bank statements, the legal documents. It's all there, plain as day. Lydia's shoulders slumped, defeated. So that's it then? We're going to lose everything? That's up to the courts to decide, I replied coolly. But if I were you, I'd start preparing for the consequences of your actions. With a strangled sob, she turned and fled, leaving me with a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. Once a proud, arrogant woman, Lydia had been reduced to a sniveling wreck by the weight of her own greed and deception. In the end, the evidence against them was too damning to refute. Ethan and Lydia's dirty laundry was aired for all to see, and the fallout was swift and merciless. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Lydia's once esteemed reputation in our community crumbled to dust. Friends and associates distanced themselves, appalled by her actions. Even her own children turned their backs on her, disgusted by her willingness to exploit their grandmother for financial gain. Ethan, for his part, remained defiant until the bitter end. But even his slick lawyer couldn't spin the overwhelming evidence in his favor. He was eventually found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted elder abuse, facing a hefty prison sentence and financial penalties. As for Lydia, the judge saw fit to disqualify her from any inheritance or claim to Eleanor's assets. A fitting punishment, in my mind, for someone so consumed by greed that they would betray their own family. With each legal victory, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The nightmare was finally over, and justice had prevailed against those who sought to exploit the most vulnerable among us. It was a hard-won battle, but one that reinforced my belief in the power of perseverance and the importance of protecting those we love, no matter the cost. I stood in the cozy living room of the quaint assisted living home we had chosen for Mom, taking in the warm, inviting atmosphere. The soft, natural light filtering through the windows cast a gentle glow over the space, and the faint scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air. It was a far cry from the cold, clinical nursing home Ethan and Lydia had envisioned for her. Just the thought of how close they had come to stripping Mom of her dignity made my blood boil. But I pushed those bitter memories aside, focusing instead on the sanctuary we had created for her. "Marla, is that you, dear?" Mom's familiar voice, tinged with confusion, but still carrying that warmth I knew so well, drew me from my thoughts. I turned to see her shuffling into the room, her eyes lighting up as she recognized me. "Hi, Mom," I said softly, crossing the space to pull her into a gentle hug. "How are you feeling today?" She patted my arm, a small frown creasing her brow. I'm not quite sure, to be honest. Everything feels a bit hazy these days." My heart clenched at the reminder of her Alzheimer's, but I mustered a reassuring smile. "That's okay. You're safe here, and I'll always be here to help you, no matter what." Mom nodded, seeming to take comfort in my words. "You're a good girl, Marla. Always looking out for your old mother." I blinked back tears, both saddened and touched by her simple praise. After everything we had been through, every battle waged to protect her, those words meant more to me than she could ever know. We settled onto the plush sofa, and I reached for her hand, marveling at how delicate it felt in mine. "Do you remember when I used to hold your hand like this as a little girl?" I asked, a wistful smile tugging at my lips. Mom's eyes softened with recollection. "Of course, you were such a curious thing, always tugging me along to explore the neighborhood." She chuckled, the sound light and airy. "I could never keep up with you." We shared a comfortable silence, basking in the warm memories of simpler times. In that moment, it was easy to forget the turmoil and heartache of the past few months, to simply exist in the peace and love that had always been the bedrock of our relationship. Eventually, Mom turned to me, her gaze clearer than I had seen in a long time. "Marla, I know things haven't been easy lately. My mind, it plays tricks on me sometimes." I opened my mouth to reassure her, but she held up a hand, silencing me gently. "But I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done for me. Protecting me, fighting for me. Not many daughters would go to such lengths for their mother." Tears pricked my eyes as the weight of her words sank in. After all the betrayal and pain, all the battles waged against those who sought to exploit her vulnerability, to hear those words of gratitude and love from Mom herself was the greatest victory of all. "Of course I would, Mom," I whispered, squeezing her hand tightly. "You're my world. I'll always be in your corner no matter what." As she leaned her head against my shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips, I knew that this, the quiet moments, the unbreakable bond of family, was worth every hardship we had endured. With Ethan and Lydia's toxic influence banished from our lives, Mom and I could finally embrace the peaceful future we had fought so hard to secure, bolstered by the knowledge that love and loyalty had ultimately triumphed over greed and deception.